swiftness of the wind, depth of the sea, stability of the earth, firmness of the rock. I arise today through God's strength to pilot me, God's might to uphold me, God's wisdom to guide me, God's eye to look before me, God's ear to hear me, God's word to speak for me, God's hand to guard me, God's way to lie before me, God's shield to protect me, God's hosts to save me, afar and anear, alone or in a multitude. Christ, shield me today. Shield me against wounding. Christ with me, Christ before me, Christ behind me, Christ in me, Christ beneath me, Christ above me. Christ on my right side, Christ on my left side. Christ when I lay down, Christ when I sit down, Christ in the heart of everyone who thinks of me, Christ in the mouth of everyone who speaks of me, Christ in the eye that sees me, Christ in the ear that hears me. I arise today through the mighty strength of the Lord of creation. And we join St. Patrick in saying, Amen. There may be one or two of you who are here who will wonder why, as good Lutherans, and I'm not sure what a good Lutheran is as opposed to a bad Lutheran, but why good Lutherans should be celebrating St. Patrick's Day. Do you know that St. Patrick's Day, according to our official documents, found, for example, here in the Cranberry Book, St. Patrick's Day is actually recognized as one of the days of the saints to be observed in the Lutheran Church. Not just in the Roman Catholic Church, but in the Lutheran Church. I'm remembering back to a time now 60 years ago. I was a young pastor sitting on the board of the synod that was known as the Eastern Pennsylvania Synod, the successor synod to what was known as the Ministerium of Pennsylvania. The Ministerium of Pennsylvania was actually the original synod, the original Lutheran body, which took hold in that part of Pennsylvania when Muhlenberg reached these shores. And sitting on the board of that synod, young as I was, there was a matter of great concern which came before the synodical board. I'm not sure if it came in seriousness or it came in jest. There was a congregation that wanted to be formed up in the Pocono Mountains. And they wanted to call themselves St. Patrick's Lutheran Church. Now you can imagine that that sparked a little bit of conversation among that board. And I was the one who suggested, well, if Catholic Church can take the name, why can't Lutheran churches? Isn't he one of our saints? And there were some older members of the synod board who kind of looked at me over the top of their glasses. What do you mean, Herb? Well, I said, St. Patrick is a saint, isn't he? Where did you learn that? I said, well, I was a recent graduate of the Philadelphia Seminary, and so from the Philadelphia Seminary in one of my classes had said that was true. Who was that? Thankfully, the professor remained at the seminary. Now, would you believe, all of you sitting here, would you believe that the hymn book that is in front of you actually has a hymn that is attributed to St. Patrick? Get out your Cranberry books. and turn to number 450. I was introduced to this after I retired from active ministry and had to join the Episcopal Church in Connecticut because the Lutherans no longer wanted me. I might interfere as a former pastor and conference dean. So joining the Episcopal Church in Torrington, one of the first services that I attended was a baptism, and this hymn was played during that baptism. Now you can play it. I should have gotten Michael in here, truly, but this hymn can be played in a lively way, or it can be played in a god-awful slow way. And depending upon what kind of registrations you use at the organ, it's amazing how deadly it can sound. Anyhow, remembering the prayer that I just prayed with you, let's look at this and let's speak this hymn together rather than singing it. There are 5 verses. So together we say, I bind unto myself today the strong name of the Trinity, invocation of the same, the 3 in 1 and 1 in 3. Verse 2, I bind this day to me forever by power of faith, Christ's incarnation, his baptism in the Jordan River, his cross of death for my salvation, his bursting from the spired tomb, the heavenly way, his coming at the day of doom, I bind unto myself today. Let's go up to verse 3. I bind unto myself today the virtues of the starlit heaven, the glorious sun's life-giving ray, the whiteness of the moon at even, the flashing of the lightning free, the whirling winds, tempestuous shocks, the stable earth, the deep salt sea around the old eternal rocks. Verse 4, Christ be with me, Christ within me, Christ behind me, Christ before me, Christ beneath me, Christ above me, Christ in quiet, Christ in danger, Christ beside me, Christ to win me, Christ to comfort and restore me, Christ in the hearts of all that love me, Christ in mouth of friend and stranger. And finally, verse 5, I bind unto myself the name, the strong name of the Trinity, by invocation of the same, the 3 in 1 and 1 in 3, of whom all nature has creation eternal, Father, Spirit, Word. Praise to the Lord of my salvation. Salvation is of Christ the Lord. This is a strong hymn of faith, as you can see. It speaks of the importance of the Word. It speaks of the importance of the Trinity, the 3 in 1, the 1 in 3. It speaks about the impetuousness. Do you have it? Why don't you put it by that microphone and play it?
No, it's not even loud enough here, so I'll look for a better one.
Okay, you do so. Now, one more thing. Since we have spent this much time on St. Patrick, I'll take a little time away from Abraham. Who was St. Patrick? 461 was what? Correct. His day is celebrated on March 17th in observance of his death in 461. Let me provide you just this kind of overview, which I got from the History Channel. St. Patrick, the patron saint of Ireland, is one of Christianity's most widely known figures. But for all of his prevalence in culture, namely the holiday of the day of his death that bears his name, his life remains somewhat of a mystery to people. Many of the stories traditionally associated with St. Patrick, including the famous account of his banishing all the snakes from Ireland, are false, the product of hundreds of years of exaggerated storytelling. St. Patrick was actually born in Britain, not in Ireland, born to wealthy parents near the end of the 4th century AD. He is again believed to have died on March 17th, around 460 or 461 AD. Although his father was a Christian deacon, it has been suggested that he probably took on the role because of tax incentives, and there is no evidence that Patrick came from a particularly religious family. At the age of 16, Patrick was taken a prisoner by a group of Irish raiders who were attacking his family's estate. They transported him to Ireland, where he spent 6 years in captivity. There is some dispute over where this captivity took place, although many believe he was taken to live in Mount Slemish in County Antrim. It is more likely that he was actually held in County Mayo near Killala. If Pastor Ken were here, I'm sure he could point these places out to all of us. During this time, Patrick worked as a shepherd, outdoors and away from people. Lonely and afraid, he turned to his religion for solace, becoming a devout Christian. It is also believed that Patrick first began to dream of converting the Irish people to Christianity during his captivity. After more than 6 years as a prisoner, Patrick escaped. According to his writing, a voice which he believed to be God's voice spoke to him in a dream, telling him it was time to leave Ireland. To do so, Patrick walked nearly 200 miles from County Mayo, where he is believed to have been held, to the Irish coast. After escaping to Britain, Patrick reported that he experienced a second revelation. An angel in a dream tells him to return to Ireland as a missionary. Soon after, Patrick began religious training, a course of study that lasted more than 15 years. After his ordination as a priest, Patrick was sent to Ireland with a dual mission: to minister to Christians already living in Ireland, and secondly, to begin to convert the Irish. Interestingly enough, this mission contradicts the widely held notion that Patrick actually introduced Christianity to Ireland. He did not. Familiar with the Irish language and culture, Patrick chose to incorporate traditional ritual into his lessons of Christianity instead of attempting to eradicate native Irish beliefs. For instance, Patrick used bonfires to celebrate Easter, since the Irish were used to honoring their gods with fire. He also superimposed a sun, a powerful Irish symbol, onto the Christian cross to create what is now known as the Celtic cross, so that veneration of the symbol would seem more natural to the culture of the Irish. Although there were a small number of Christians on the island when Patrick arrived, most Irish practiced a pagan-based religion. The Irish culture centered around a rich tradition of oral legend and myth. When this is considered, it's no surprise that the story of Patrick's life became exaggerated over the centuries, spinning exciting tales to remember history and always have been a part of the Irish way of life. Patrick may be known as the patron saint of Ireland, but Patrick was never actually canonized by the Catholic Church. This is simply due to the era in which he lived. During the first millennium, there was no formal canonization process in the Catholic Church. After becoming a priest and helping to spread Christianity through Ireland, Patrick was likely proclaimed a saint by popular acclaim. Now you know a little more about St. Patrick. Yes, 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 indeed. I wish I knew as much about St. Armand as I now know about St. Patrick. I can't tell you how many times in past years, and I've been here now almost 20, I can't tell you how many times people have come up to me. In fact, even some of the biblical scholars whom we had in the speaker series who have come up and said privately, "Can you tell me who St. Armand was?" Pardon? Yes, I am very much aware of that. I am very much aware of that. But we've had a couple of professors, frankly, one of them was an interim pastor here who came from Luther Seminary in St. Paul, who not only asked me on one occasion if the water in the Sarasota Bay was sweet water. That's not salt water, is it? It was that same one, that same individual who asked me, "Who is St. Armand?" Well, however you wish to pronounce it, whatever. Yes, I'm aware of St. Armand. I'm aware of his connection to John Ringling, etc.
To those various places in Ireland with Professor Matt Becker and another professor, Valparaiso. And so Julia and I are looking closely at
Bob is expecting to come back into our midst as St. Robert. We make an important turn today. Last week we were talking about God's covenant with Noah, and we talked about the sacrifice that Noah made after indeed he exited from the ark, and indeed God's recognition of that sacrifice was what? The establishment of a covenant was accomplished not just by the sacrifice, but by God's doing what? No, that was the sign of the covenant. But what was it that moved God? Nick has got it. Nick Hauser had it, as I would expect. It was the odor. It was the smoke that was arising from the burning of the carcasses, if you will, that was pleasing to God. And it was because of that that God sent this sign, namely the rainbow that is in the sky. I don't know what your experience has been, how you have felt about some of the chapters of Genesis. I can tell you that after reading chapter number 10 and getting into chapter number 11, the reading gets for me to be very heavy. It may be heavy going back to my seminary days. One of my professors of Old Testament, Robert Borneman, who later became a good friend, was attending the Hebrew seminary in Philadelphia. And he thought it was important for his freshman students in seminary. I'm not sure, did we call ourselves freshmen at that point or first year students in seminary? It became important for him that we memorize the descendants of Noah so that we would be able to speak them or at least identify them in future conversation. I kid you not, I failed. miserably that particular quiz. That's why I like something like this. I'm going to play for you a reading of